Hi everyone. Hello. I'm Rashenka, and I'd like to warmly welcome you all to the webinar hosted by SecPod and South Ezoref team of South Asian Technologies, and would glad like to welcome you all today and thank you for joining us. Um, so today we are going to speak about SecPod and the insight to vulnerability management. And today, our special guest speaker is Mr. Chandrasekhar Baswan, the founder and CEO of SecPod. Um, thank you, Mr. Chandrasekhar Baswan. I would like to introduce you all, and he's here to speak to you guys. And Mr. Chandrasekhar, you could carry on. You could take. You could speak now with to the attendees.
All right. Thank you very much, Rashenka. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for taking the time to be part of this session today. Really happy to be talking to a audience from Sri Lanka. Let me share my screen. Are you all able to see the screen? Rashenka, can you please confirm it?
Yeah, can see the screen. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. Thank you once again. So the topic of discussion today is enough discovering vulnerabilities and go beyond. So the topic is kind of hinting towards an action, not just discovering a vulnerability in the network, but also there is something else that must be done in order to prevent ourselves from getting attacked. So that is going to be the premise of my uh, conversation today. So with that, my name is Chandrasekhar. I am the founder and CEO of SecPod Technologies. So we are a Bangalore-based company. We are about 60-member team. We also have our sales operations office in the US. Uh, we do have our customer presence in primarily in the US and also in the Asia Pacific region. I am based in Bangalore. So the agenda is what is likely going to change in the coming year. I mean, this is the most important discussion that is there on everyone's mind because of the altered scenario in the current situation with COVID and working from home and everything else is changing around that. Secondly, why attacks continue to prevail and what should be done in order to mitigate, in order to prevent ourselves from being attacked. And if time permits, I'll walk you through our solution to this problem. And finally, we can get into questions and answers towards the end of the session. So in between, if you have any question, please feel free to type in those and we will go through each of those towards the end. So one of the topic of today's discussion is why attacks continue to occur and why enterprises are struggling to uh, manage their enterprise security and how effectively can we manage and what are the problems that are there today in the enterprise as far as security is concerned.
Hi, Chandra. Sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt, but your slide is stuck at slide 1.
Okay.
And if possible, you can increase the. So I think there's an arrow key. If you can press that, open it up fully.
Can you still see?
Yes.
You can have the
Good.
full window.
Yeah, that is what is causing the problem.
You can
actually.
just come down here onto the just below. There is arrow key which you can. There. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So why enterprises are struggling to manage their cybersecurity posture, and what are those challenges that are typically encountered by the security administrators and IT administrators to safeguard their enterprise assets? So that is going to be one of the topic that we want to discuss. Now, typically what happens is there are large number of vulnerabilities that are being discovered on a day-to-day basis. So if you look at the vulnerability database of last year's, the vulnerability count crossed 20,000 overall throughout the year. So that sums up to about 50 to 60 new vulnerability being discovered every day. And invariably, we are hearing attacks after attacks that are exploiting some sort of a weakness. The hot topic these days is the SolarWinds Orion product update and a vulnerability in that, and how an attacker could exploit that vulnerability to drop in their own executable into the product's update process. So similar to that, if you analyze any of the attacks that have occurred in the past, invariably you will see that some sort of a vulnerability or a weakness is being exploited by the attackers. A weakness could be a process-specific weakness, or a people weakness, or the tools and the computing environment weakness in the computing environment itself. So invariably, attackers have to find some sort of a weakness which can be exploited, and they go after finding those weaknesses to launch their attacks. And organizations also have the responsibility of finding those weaknesses in advance before an attacker could exploit them. And that is the process of risk management or risk assessment, called in different terms: vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, etc. Now, on one hand, the newer vulnerabilities are being discovered at a very alarming scale, and on an average of 50 to 60 new vulnerability being discovered. Typically, organizations run these risk management or a risk assessment programs once in a month or a quarter or a biannual exercise, only to meet certain audit criteria. Now, the problem with this periodicity of doing a scanning once in a quarter or a month is that there is irony there, because vulnerabilities are being discovered every day, but the process for finding those weaknesses within our organization is not every day. It is once in a month and once in a quarter. So it is making it, ultimately it is making it really easy for attackers to find these vulnerabilities well in advance and launch attacks against those weaknesses that are widely published, and then end up succeeding in dropping a particular malicious code inside the organization's environment. From then there onwards, it is a matter of reaching to a system where the sensitive information is there, for example, or cause certain availability related attacks, for example. So ultimately, it boils down to what is that attackers are trying to do and what is their target. And 90% of the attacks that have occurred are invariably making use of vulnerabilities and misconfigurations in the IT system or the computing system. And As part of these risk assessment exercise organizations run, you end up discovering large number of vulnerabilities, and there is an action that needs to be applied as part of a follow-up procedure. So you know there are vulnerabilities, and how do I overcome those or mitigate those or remediate those vulnerabilities? And invariably, organizations have certain mechanism, maybe a patch management system or certain IT tools to mitigate those risks that are identified. And there again, it takes anywhere between 3 to 5 months to mitigate those vulnerabilities. On one hand, we are not doing a vulnerability scan on a daily basis to discover vulnerability, but we are resorting to monthly and quarterly scanning. On the other hand, we are taking a lot of time to mitigate those vulnerabilities. Again, 5 to 6 months window in total from the time a vulnerability is discovered to the time a patch is applied or some sort of a mitigation is rolled out. And that again is a big attack window for attackers to exploit. It's essentially makes their job extremely easy to identify these vulnerabilities and weaknesses and then launch attacks against those weaknesses. The reason why this happens is a lot of complexities are there in the security tools. And it is not easy to run a vulnerability scan as frequently as we would like to. Because of productivity impact, system resources are going to be consumed. Network bandwidth can be throttled, for example. Ultimately, organizations' productivity will take a hit. And adding to that, the product complexities are there and multiple point products or solutions one has to invest in. All of these put together, it becomes extremely cumbersome for most organizations to implement an effective risk management program. And this is the primary reason why attacks continue to occur. So invariably, any attack that is analyzed from the recent one to the earlier ones, you will see that these vulnerabilities were there in those organizations that were attacked, and attackers could launch attacks against or exploit those weaknesses that were there. So typically, this is what most organizations do. Vulnerability management as a program is being run independently, and then maybe someone has invested in a patch management solution operating in silos. They don't talk to each other, and they are independent solution. A patch management solution does not know about vulnerabilities, or a vulnerability management solution does not know how to mitigate those vulnerabilities that are identified. And that is a huge gap. That is where the problem, the root of the problem is, which is delaying the process of vulnerability mitigation. In an ideal scenario, we would like to know the vulnerability as soon as a vulnerability is discovered. And we should have approach to mitigate those vulnerability as soon as we know those vulnerabilities are present within my organization. Of course, you can do certain prioritization on top of that to see what should be the most critical vulnerability that I want to mitigate, and I should have those options to mitigate those vulnerabilities. Although we are talking about patch management here, vulnerability mitigation can actually go beyond patching alone. For example, an outdated protocol is open in one of the service that a port is listening on, and that needs to be turned off. A patch management product typically does not do such vulnerability mitigation. But again, I mean, it is still a vulnerability that must be mitigated. SMB-V1, for example, is the most talked about weakness that is present and exploited by most ransomware and malware, including WannaCry. So such things are typically not addressed by patch management solution, but you need to have certain additional tools to mitigate those as well. So because of these complexities, managing risks that are present within the organization's computing environment is extremely difficult and cumbersome and time-taking or effort-taking. So that is where the crux of the problem lies. Now, what is our solution and how are we doing it differently, and how we can help solve this fundamental problem that is uh, bugging IT administrators and security administrators? What we have is Saner now as a platform which consolidates or brings together or unifies multiple use cases of cybersecurity into one console with one single agent that can be deployed within the IT endpoint environment. All of these use cases can be addressed, and they're all integrated into the same console, making it extremely easy and to use, as well as much of these processes are automated to a day-to-day routine. I talked about the periodicity being once in a month and once in a quarter. So in our case, we do that assessment every day. So we already know why it is important to do the risk assessment every day. So vulnerability management tool that we have, part of our solution, runs a scan every day. Scan typically takes about 5 to 10 minutes to complete, irrespective of the size of the organization. Which is one of the primary problem which is typically there in most of the vulnerability assessment solutions. So you have to stagger the scanning activity subnet by subnet, for example, to manage the load that is there, and also manage the system resource consumption and network bandwidth utilization. So all of those problems are addressed. And within about 5 to 10 minutes, a scan would be presented, scan results would be presented on the console. So across the enterprise, you know what vulnerabilities are there, what applications are being used, and which are those vulnerabilities which are being exploited and that needs immediate attention. All of that data is presented within the same console. And now we have an integrated patch management also within the same console. So we discover the vulnerability, you identified and you prioritized, and you know what are those vulnerabilities that are being exploited, and that needs to be mitigated immediately. So with a patch management solution, you can go ahead and roll out those security patches to mitigate the vulnerability within the same console. Can be an automated process, or it can be pushed to those applicable endpoint systems where this patch needs to be installed. And again, making it into a day-to-day routine as against periodic activity, which is the problem that I identified in the previous part. So a patch management solution also, it is a heterogeneous patching solution. It can address Windows systems, Linux systems, and Mac systems, and also a large list of third-party applications, firmware and driver related updates. So all of those capabilities are part of the patch management solution. So with this integrated capability of running a vulnerability scan every day and patching those discovered vulnerability within the same console, makes it extremely easy for risk management with vulnerability and patching coming together with a single solution. Now, beyond these two tools, we also have other tools. So risk management is not just vulnerability, knowing the vulnerabilities that are there and patching those vulnerabilities, but it's also about identifying what other weaknesses are there that could be exploited, and can I mitigate those weaknesses as well. So asset management, for example, gives visibility to the IT environment on a day-to-day basis. So you know what the assets that you're looking to secure, what is there within that perimeter, what applications are installed in each of these. Are there outdated applications? Do you have certain applications that are not being used? Are there rogue applications present within the environment? Do I need to blacklist those? All of that information is presented on the asset management solution. And then we have compliance management. I gave an example of SMBV1, which is a weakness, which is again as good as a high critical vulnerability that needs to be fixed. So compliance management solution analyzes each of such weaknesses and presents those. Similar to vulnerability management, it identifies all of those weaknesses that could be exploited by the attackers, like a weak password or encryption strength is not okay, or outdated protocols are enabled, which should not be. So there are at least 500 to 600 different checks one could do assessing the weaknesses across all these heterogeneous IT environments from Windows, Linux to Mac operating systems. And the best part is that it also has capability to mitigate those. So again, coming back to the SMB V1, so if you have to turn it off across all the 1,000 systems that are present within the environment, you can roll out such changes from the same console. So all of the 500, 600 rules that I talked about, each of them comes with mitigation as well. If there is a deviation, you go ahead and mitigate those deviations. And then we have an endpoint management solution, which again is useful to get visibility to all other security controls that must be monitored. For example, is my antivirus installed up to date and running? What are all the network ports that are open across all these endpoint systems? What processes are running? What services are running? Is DEPASLR enabled? Are there additional firewall rules that are not configured properly? So there are hundreds of such security checks that can be monitored. Again, on a real-time monitoring basis, endpoints can be probed within 2 to 3 seconds. You will get visibility. For example, I want to know all the antiviruses that are present across all the systems, and if someone has turned off an antivirus. So typically, most of the attackers turn off the AV engine while an attack is taking place. So such things can also be discovered in real time to see if someone is not running a particular component within the antivirus. So likewise, hundreds of such checks can be assessed. And again, the best part is that those can be mitigated as well. So we have an array of actions that are built into the endpoint management tool to act upon deviations that are found while monitoring. An example could be a process abc.exe is running, which is a rogue process. I want to kill it. You have action for it. Or if I see a rogue network connection that is making an outbound connection to an external site, and that is a malicious site, you can go ahead and terminate such network connections. So likewise, process can be stopped and services can be restarted. Applications can be uninstalled if you see a rogue application. If you want to go ahead and make registry changes, you can do. So again, hundreds of actions that are built into the endpoint management tool to address those weaknesses as well. So if you look at all of these 5 tools that I talked about so far, there is one part which is assessing the risks continuously on a day-to-day basis. You get to view what risks are there, from vulnerabilities to misconfigurations to other security controls that must be enabled or that must be monitored. So all of that visibility you get on a day-to-day basis. And there is a next step that is the most important step. Once I know that there is a problem, how do I mitigate those problems? The problem mitigation can be through a patch management or fixing those misconfigurations that are present in the system, or uninstalling applications, or putting your net device into a quarantine mode, or stopping a service. Again, hundreds of actions, part of the whole solution. So you know the problem, fine. Understand the risk involved. If that problem is left alone, if that should not be, you act upon it to fix that. So this way you can ensure on a day-to-day basis, a cyber hygiene posture is maintained, making it extremely hard for attackers to target your systems that are having these weaknesses. So even in military terms, it is always about making our as resilient as possible for attackers to make them not succeed or make them fail in their attack. So that is the premise in which the product is built with. So can I identify my weaknesses before an attacker can notice those? And can I mitigate those weaknesses that are identified as much as possible in an automated manner, and ensure that this is continuously such a security posture is maintained. Aiding to that, our security research team is continuously researching on these vulnerabilities, malwares that are exploiting those weaknesses. So every day, our team is adding that intelligence that is required for the product to discover such weaknesses and also apply the mitigation to those weaknesses that are discovered. So Saner now as a platform unifies cyber hygiene management into one single console with one single agent. All of those requirements can be addressed within the same console. Automating end-to-end vulnerability mitigation to reduce the risks and vulnerabilities that are identified. Alternatively, it can be used as a security compliance assessment platform as well. Invariably, if you look at PCI's security guidelines or HIPAA or ISO 27001 or NIST cybersecurity framework, or even CIS controls, all of them tend to identify those activities that one should do to safeguard their environment. Invariably, all of them talk a similar language if you were to identify those technical requirements that are coming out of these compliance benchmarks. So our platform is addressing those technical benchmarks in order to ensure compliance to these regulatory standards or technical standards. When I say compliance, it's not just assessing for compliance, but also mitigating and ensuring that the devices are adhering to that particular compliance posture. And third use case is continuously monitoring the IT environment for any deviations and acting upon those deviations if a system is not in line with the expected baseline or a benchmark that we set for the organization. So Saner now as a platform, when it comes to deployment, we do have both SaaS as well as on-premise deployment. So based on customers' need, we can choose the deployment method. Irrespective of the deployment method that is chosen, it is very easy to onboard a customer into the Saner now environment. We have a purpose-built server, which is similar to an appliance, but a virtual appliance that can be installed on a physical hardware or run as a VM. It has all the components bundled in it, including operating systems and all the database and all the components that are necessary to run that particular service. All of those are integrated, so customers need not invest in buying additional softwares to require to run our software. And there is an agent that gets installed on every endpoint that is being managed. So that agent communicates with the server over an HTTPS, outbound HTTPS. So there's no need for opening network policies or firewall policies, etc. HTTPS traffic is typically allowed in most of the environment. And that can be deployed in that way. Even if you were to go for a cloud-based deployment, the communication will remain the same. So the agent will do an outbound communication to our AWS deployed environment. Once the agents are installed on the managed endpoint systems, within about 5 to 10 minutes, a risk assessment would be performed. And within that window itself, you will have completed the risk assessment across the organization. As soon as agents are deployed, it runs a scan. And from there onwards, it runs a scan every day at a scheduled time. And that scan continues to be uploading its findings to the server, and the dashboard is there to present that information in a useful manner. Product is extremely easy to use, intuitive as well. I'm going to possibly demonstrate that today. So let me take this moment to quickly go through the product demo and then come back to this. So I'm going to be using one of our demo account. Just have a small deployment with 5 endpoint systems deployed on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS X. Let me go into one of these sites where these agents are installed. So with these 5 systems, these are the findings from all the tools. So we talked about multiple tools, so from endpoint management to asset management, vulnerability management, patch, compliance, and also threat detection. So all of these tools are coming together on a single console. It all starts with the deployment of the agent. So once the agent is deployed, all of them start appearing here under the managed devices section. So you will see every endpoint, whether it is online or offline, what is the operating system, IP address and MAC address, and those sort of details. It also shows what version of the agent it is running on or running with. So once that deployment is done, it runs a scan, identifies all of these issues that you see on the dashboard and publishes to the server. But each of these tools have a dashboard of its own with much more details. Of course, this is just an overview saying these many total vulnerabilities are there, but there is a dashboard that where you can get further details into this particular thing. So if you go to VM, so it is a vulnerability management, identified these many vulnerability. Here are those criticality or severity distributions. Among those vulnerabilities, what can be easily exploited? What are those network exploitable vulnerabilities that are there? Are there vulnerabilities that have high lateral movement? Another interesting thing that we do is to map these vulnerabilities to a potential attack or a ransomware. So for example, this particular CVE, which is present in these Intel-based processors, is being exploited by a malware called Spectre or an attack vector, basically. And likewise, you can get additional information from each of these.
Hi, there is a question from one of the attendees.
Okay.
And the question is, can we manage software licensing under asset management?
Yeah, I'll come to the asset management shortly. My system is having a little bit of a problem. I'll just come back to this. One second. Okay. Yeah, coming back to the vulnerability management, it also identifies what are those vulnerabilities that are recently discovered, how many vulnerabilities are there which were discovered and not mitigated. What are the top vulnerabilities based on their severity, and what are those devices that have a lot of vulnerabilities present? And so that information is presented as part of the VM tool. Again, it runs the scan every day, so the daily count may change based on the new vulnerabilities that are discovered. So with this daily knowledge of all the open vulnerabilities that are there, the next step is to go ahead and mitigate those vulnerabilities that are identified. So with our patch management solution, which is an integrated patching, we would be able to patch all of those vulnerabilities that were identified. So we saw about 1,400 vulnerability. Patch management tool can go ahead and fix these many vulnerability by rolling out about 42 patches on these 3 systems that require patching. So if you got these many devices require patching, these many applications need patching, the severity, about 55% of the patches are critical. So there is additional information by operating system, what is impact, what patches are already installed, and the jobs that are running and all that. In order to actually patch, so you can go to missing patches, select those applications that require patching, and you can set up a schedule like this. So give a task name and say when you would like this patching to take place. As part of the patching activity, you can notify a user that a patching is going to start. There are controls to reboot the system if you want to automatically reboot. And you can also run some additional scripts if you want to as part of the remediation activity, pre as well as post. And there is test and deploy capability available as well. So if you want to apply patches on a production environment, can you first go ahead and roll out those patches in a test bed and then make sure that those patches are working and then apply the patches to the production environment. So these many controls are there to apply these patches. And we also have non-security patches listed as well. So in addition to security patches, you can apply these non-security patches. If you want to do it at a device level, for example, you can select that individual device and list only the patches that are applicable for that device and select all and apply. So this is about patches. Now we also can mitigate the misconfigurations. I gave an example of SMB v1 in the session. So all of those type of mitigations are also possible here. So if you look at the info, for example, this is talking about SSH idle timeout, which is going to edit this particular file to make this change. FIPS compliance cryptographic algorithm, whether it is enabled or not. So that is also there. So all of these can be mitigated through a patching activity. We have a separate section for critical patches. We have also tracking the hardware drivers that require update. And you can roll back the patches that are already installed. And there is also an automation capability where you can go ahead and run a scheduled activity once in a month or once in a week or a daily based activity to check if any of these applications require patching, and it automatically goes and installs those required patches. So these are all the patching jobs that were created and whether they were successful or not. So if you expand these, you'll be able to see those individual patches that were installed, whether they were successful or not. So that is about patch management. I'll quickly move on to asset management, which is where one of the questions that came. Before that, here are all the detailed device information that is collected, and what are those hardware components that are there, what type of systems are there, etc. What devices are present, IP address, MAC address, and all of that inventory information you can export into a CSV. All the application level details can also be exported. Now, this is where the license management comes. So where if an organization has bought, for example, Windows 10 and volume license and 100 licenses are purchased, it will track how many were allowed, which needs to be fed into the system, and how many instances it is installed with. So if it is more than 100, you know that there are deviation. If it is less than 100, you know that it is being underutilized. So this kind of license tracking can be done. All these information are automatically collected as part of every day's scanning. User only needs to feed in this information, like what is the licenses number that it is installed, installation is allowed with. Likewise, you can measure application and hardware details also. So in addition to the license management, we do also track outdated applications or the applications that have gone end of life and end of support. Typically, those are again applications. Vulnerabilities could be there which are long standing and not mitigated by the vendor because it is end of life. So those can be tracked and we can uninstall such applications. We have application control as well, both are blacklisting and whitelisting. So this is about asset management. Coming to compliance management, which is where I talked about configuration hardening. So you can create a baseline based on readily available benchmarks that we can create based on these templates. So if you go to any of these listed templates that you have, if you look at Windows 10, each of them have about 400 to 500 different checks that can be customized. So SMB v1 is one of these. Password policy will also be there as part of this listing. So password policy. So you can customize each of them. For example, length should be 14 character password. You can feed that information and create a benchmark based on this. So as part of the scan that is run, it will identify all the deviations based on this benchmark, and it will list that compliance posture for that benchmark. For example, this is an Ubuntu system where these many rules it ran, and it identified that these many passed and these many actually in this case, all of them have passed. If you go to secure boot settings, for example, one has passed and one has failed. So this way it runs an assessment scan against the benchmark or a baseline every day. And it also identifies those possible remediations to fix these deviations. So disable DCCP kernel module, for example, is one of the baseline item that was tracked, and you can go ahead and fix this on this particular Ubuntu system. So enable SSH access is limited. Maybe this is based on who can log in. Can a root user log in as an SSH from the remote? That can be prevented, for example. Such deviations can also be identified and mitigated through the compliance management tool. Now, finally, come to the endpoint management, which is where all the additional security controls that I talked about can be tracked through checks. So we have endpoint protection software, which is nothing but the AV's antivirus software. So which AV is installed? Is it running? Signature database is up to date or not? And if endpoint protection service is enabled in that or not. So likewise, irrespective of the, not just Windows Defender, but irrespective of the AV that is installed in the customer environment, we will be able to identify those AVs and check all these status. So there are additional controls like system health tracking, etc. But let me show you a few other use cases. For example, open ports could be one of the requirements. So I can go ahead and identify all the ports that are open, processes that are running, which system it is running on. And the best part is that if this particular process is not supposed to be running, I can take an example. Most of these are Windows processes which cannot be terminated, but you can stop those processes by name, or if there is a service that is running, you can stop the service also. And DHCP status, for example, if you want to track, you can know whether DHCP is enabled, what are those interface details and all that. What all processes that are running, are there BIOS information which is outdated, are there guest accounts, who is the user who is currently logged in. All of these can be tracked with this particular list of checks, which are available for Linux and Mac OS X as well. Now, once you have seen visibility or gained visibility into the environment. It's about actions. So these are all the possible actions that you can apply, from application and device control, where you can block applications or devices. Software deployment allows you to either install software applications that are vulnerability free, or the latest versions of all of these prepackaged applications we have already created. These can be rolled out. Alternatively, you can upload your own package and push those applications into the environment. Another very useful need is to uninstall a particular application which may be present, which is not wanted. Maybe a rogue application is installed by someone and you want to track those, so you can go ahead and uninstall those as well. So similarly, we have actions for controlling the processes, stop, start, and restart processes, editing registry entries, service management, network-related settings, including quarantining a particular device out of into a particular network, restarting or shutting down systems, file quarantining or deleting. All of these can be performed through this console within the endpoint management system. So all of these tools coming together, running a scan every day, and with the integrated option of remediating these findings, makes it extremely easy and automated day-to-day process. In addition to that, of course, we have some canned reports that can be exported into a PDF, or you can also create interesting reports using these report APIs that are there. So this gives you a list of all the vulnerabilities, what patches that needs to be installed. Just a click away. So if you want to get asset applications that are installed, device information. Likewise, patches, how many systems require patching. So each of these can be dragged onto the report canvas to create interesting reports that is meeting your need. And once such report is created, you can save the report and use it for data views, as well as download these reports into in the PDF format, or you can send out email periodically for with this attachment, PDF attachment. We do have email-based alerts as well. So that's a quick overview on the product and all the tools. So we can move on to any questions that may be there from the audience now. Okay, I see there is one question. So all these products working in Linux platforms? Yes. What are the supported Linux versions? We do have Red Hat, CentOS, Ubuntu, Debian, Fedora, Amazon Linux, Oracle Linux. We're adding SUSE Linux shortly with the next release. So these are the covered operating systems as of now.
So Chandra, since I'm Chetty here, so since we don't have any questions, is there another part or is it over?
This is what I had planned, or what you
okay,
had in mind.
So,
yeah, so
okay, not a problem. So I think it's a very interesting thing, SecPod, because you get the vulnerability management, the patch management, and so many other things as well. Because otherwise, a lot of customers do go for point-based solutions, and there's no integration between those solutions, right? So I'm sure a lot of, if there are any other questions, you all can always write to Rashenka. Rashenka will be sending you all an email with, if you want to revisit this presentation, a link with the presentation so that you can go revisit, look at it again. And if you require any further details, you can also get in touch with Rashenka, who can set up maybe a POC, for the product, or any presentations you all want to see again. We can probably set that up. Anything else from you, Chandra?
Yeah, I think a summary. So with this introduction to the product that you have seen and also a quick demo of the product. If you have further questions, we are happy to set up additional demo.
There are a few questions. Is it okay if I ask them, Chandrasekhar?
Yeah, please go ahead.
There is a question from the attendee. What is so unique about the ScanNow platform that other vendors don't have?
Okay.
Is one of them.
Okay, let me go ahead and answer that. So the uniqueness is coming from being able to automatically perform a risk assessment or a vulnerability assessment scanning every day, which does not happen with many other vendors. That means that you have visibility to the vulnerabilities every day. And the second important thing is with the integration that we have, with the patching coming together along with the vulnerability management solution and few other modules that I talked about. So we can manage and automate the cyber hygiene posture to a day-to-day routine. So most other vendors do not have this integrated capability of identifying the risks and also mitigating the risks. So we were the first to introduce, and we continue to be unique in that sense. And it is extremely intuitive, easy to use platform. And the third, which is what most important differentiation, is that security effectiveness that you can achieve by knowing the problem on a day-to-day basis, but also mitigate those problems on a day-to-day basis, thereby preventing the attackers from launching attacks against your IT environment. So these are some of the unique things that we bring onto the platform. One is, of course, 6 modules are coming together on a single console and second is integrated capability of being able to identify the problem, but also mitigating the problem and also making it into a day-to-day of automated routine, which is a hassle in most other products or most other vendor solutions.
Super. So there's one more. That other question is, does ScanNow platform support all versions of Windows and Linux?
Yes, we support all of those Windows platforms that are supported by Microsoft. And also the Linux distributions that I mentioned, all of those are supported by us.
Chandra, there's another question.
Yeah.
Will there be any performance issues as the vulnerability is being run daily? And can we have a approximate usage of processing memory or storage at the client server in which the endpoint is deployed? So basically what they're asking, yeah.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, so our goal was to make it into a day-to-day automated routine. And the reason why most organizations do not run a day-to-day scanning, as I mentioned, is because of system usage and network bandwidth problems and all that, which is one of the area that we paid extra effort into making sure that it does not consume a lot of resources. So it runs a scan, as I mentioned, within about 5 to 10 minutes, it completes the scan. And in that 5 to 10 minutes window, RAM usage can be up to about 200 MB and CPU usage can be controlled. So you can set it to run at 20% CPU or 30% CPU, etc. So there is control available for users to specify. If control is not there, whatever is available CPU, it uses to complete the scan quickly, but otherwise also it does not go beyond 10 to 12 minutes at the max, the scanning period. So this scanning can be set up at whatever time that is convenient. Disk usage can be up to about 500 MB when it is installed post the installation. The executable itself is just about 12 MB in size.
Can you also schedule? Can you also schedule the scan when the endpoint is on idle? Is that a possibility or no?
Not at this point in time. That is something that we are working on. But you can schedule it to run like by time, like 12 o'clock or midnight or 12 o'clock lunchtime, for example.
Okay, brilliant.
it runs in the background. Users generally do not notice any performance degradation of their systems.
Brilliant. If somebody, if one of our customers or partners want to see a demo or POC of this solution, is there any possibility of that, and how can we accommodate that, Chandra?
Yeah, so certainly, yeah. So I think anybody interested in seeing further demo and even doing evaluation of a product, you can definitely reach out to the SAT team, and who will coordinate with us to do another deep down demo if required, or a technical detail demo if required, and also help you set up and do a trial evaluation on your systems. Within your environment, you'll be able to try this product and get a feel of the product yourself. And it is extremely easy to do this evaluation. If you were to sign up for our cloud platform, within about 1 hour time, you will be able to complete that whole exercise of installing, running the scan, patching on few systems. All of those capabilities can be accomplished within that session, guided session that we will provide through our technical teams.
Okay, then. So Rashankar, Chandra, Anil, and Jag, if there's nothing else, we can probably close the session. Thank you very much for joining. And I think Rashankar will be sending out that links where you can revisit the presentation and have a look at it, and also get in touch with Rashankar and the SAT team if you require any other information. Okay. Thank you very much from SAT and SecPod. Chandra?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be part of this session, afternoon time. And thanks for patient hearing and good questions that you had. So hopefully we'll have opportunity to discuss further and use our solution within your environment at some point.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining once again.
Thanks a lot.